How would you factor it? Does that make sense? We signed both of those before. Alright, so what we're looking at now are ones where we've got sine, cosine, tangent. If you don't like this sine squared x, sine squared x is the same thing as sine of x squared. So if you need to rewrite them like that every time, that's fine. That means the same thing. Any ideas how we could factor sine squared x minus 1? Does that make sense? It's of the same form as this one. Yeah. Does that make sense? If you have trouble figuring out how to factor this, instead of sine squared, you can write x squared and factor it, and then in place of x, put back in sine x. So if you're having trouble factoring one, replace all of your sine x's or whatever with just a variable and factor it that way. For this one, how would you factor it? Take out a tangent. If you pull out a tangent, what are you left with? And if you pull out a tangent, you're left with 1. Do y'all see how this works? So that's how you factor these. Very similar to normal factoring, but instead of a variable, you're using sine, cosine, or tangent. Alright, so now what we're going to do with them, we're actually going to solve them. So it's basically set equal to 0, and then you solve for x. How would you factor tangent squared minus 1? Does that make sense? Any ideas what we would do at this point? Do what? Yes, set them each equal to 0. Both of the factors equal to 0. Y'all remember whenever you factor normally x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0, you would set them each equal to 0. So what is tangent of x equal? -1, or tangent of x equals 1. They won't always be where they're the same number, just different signs. Sometimes, but not always. So when does tangent equal 1? What angle? 45 degrees. Okay, so when is it a -1 though? 135 and 315, the second and the fourth quadrants. And then when is it going to be a +1? 45 degrees. To 25. Those are your 4 answers. Does that make sense? And if you want to put them all, like x equals all 4 of them, that's fine. But I kind of ran out of room. Any questions on that one? Okay. I haven't decided. Either 1 or 2 more.
Okay, so when we get back, we won't have.
You might have a couple more homeworks, but there won't be any more tests for the 6 weeks. I hate that they like put the end of the 6 weeks after. Yeah. Yeah. Like it doesn't make sense. Why? All right. So how would you factor this? Does that make sense? And then what would you do? Right? Cosine of x equals 0, or cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. So cosine of x equals 1. Any questions so far? Okay, when does cosine equal 0 and 1? What are they called? Yeah, y'all remember what they're called? No, what? Do y'all remember the name of them? Starts with a Q. Quadrantal. These 4, yeah, they're points. Is cosine the x or the y value? Okay, what is the x value here? Okay, when is cosine 0? 90 degrees and 270 degrees. Does that make sense? So those are part of your answer. When is cosine equal to 1? At 0 degrees. Why do we not put 360? It's less than 360. Because that's the only point where you would have 2 possible answers for the same angle. Is at 0 and 360. So those are your 3 answers. Does that make sense? Any questions there? Okay. Yeah, sine of x times cosine of x equals sine of 2x. This one's a little bit different than the last 2. What do we have on both sides? A sine. So can you just cancel out the signs? If you do, you're not going to get all of the possible answers. Does that make sense? You always want to factor. You never want to cancel out. Never divide out the common factor. You always want to actually factor it. Okay? So what would we need to do to be able to factor that? When you factor, what do? You start by doing what? You want it equal to 0. Yes. Does that make sense? Yeah, you can factor out a sine. What do you have left? Does that make sense? Do y'all see how that works? Okay, now what? And what else? And so what does cosine of x equal? Does that make sense? Do y'all see how that works? Okay, so sine of x equals 0. What kind of angle? Quadrantals. Where is the sine 0? It's the y value. At those two. Yes. X equals 0 and 180. Does that make sense? And then what about for cosine of x equals 1/2? It's going to be a 60-degree angle. So where is cosine positive? Okay, so first is a 60 degree, and the fourth is 300 degrees. Does that make sense? Some of you may have noticed a pattern about the other trig equations. Like if it says cosine of 3 theta equals whatever, you may have noticed how many answers you should have. These, there is no rhyme or reason to how many you have. So that pattern, do what? Yeah. You could have 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, it just depends. Yeah. I mean, it just depends on what the question is. On the other ones, though, there was more of a set pattern. I mean, if you notice it, that's fine. If not, that's fine. But these, there's just not really a pattern. It seems more random. Any questions on these? Okay.